Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, Arrival at Hawthorn Manor. The morning mist lay heavy across the moorland as Hercule Poirot's train approached the small station nearest to Hawthorn Manor. The world outside the window was an ethereal wash of grey, the distant hills barely distinguishable through the thick fog. Poirot, ever precise in his dress, adjusted the cuffs of his perfectly starched shirt and straightened the lapels of his dark suit. His small, perfectly groomed moustache twitched as he observed the scene, noting immediately the peculiar patterns of damp and frost on the platform. A solitary carriage awaited him. Its wheels crunched along the gravel drive as they wound up the lane, flanked by twisted hedgerows, until the great spires of Hawthorn Manor emerged like silent sentinels through the mist. The manor was a grand structure of weathered stone, its high windows reflecting the pale light of dawn. Yet there was an unsettling quality to it, Poirot thought, a heaviness, as though the house itself carried secrets it had no intention of revealing. At the grand entrance stood Lady Vivienne Hawthorn. A tall woman, her posture still regal despite a tremor of anxiety in her hands, she welcomed Poirot with a mix of relief and apprehension. "Monsieur Poirot, thank you for coming at such short notice," she said, her voice quivering slightly. I do hope you can help us. Some terrible thing, has happened." Poirot inclined his head, his manner calm yet charged with a subtle, penetrating energy. "Madam, you may rest assured. I shall do everything in my power to bring clarity where confusion reigns. But I beg you, let me examine the scene, speak to your family, and observe. It is in the details, Miss Amos, that the truth always resides." Inside, the manor revealed itself as both magnificent and oppressive. The hall was vast, lined with portraits of stern-looking ancestors, each gaze seemingly fixed upon visitors with unspoken judgment. Heavy velvet drapes muffled the light from the tall windows, casting dim shadows upon the polished floors. A grand staircase rose in a sweeping curve, its steps worn with age. Poirot's sharp eyes immediately noted minor irregularities, a scuff on the second step, faint dust trails along the edges of the rugs, and a subtle disturbance in the otherwise meticulous order of the hall. Lady Vivienne led him to the drawing room, where the family had gathered for breakfast, though their appetite had been dulled by anxiety. Edward Hawthorn, her nephew, was seated stiffly by the fire, his brow furrowed and expression tight. Clara, the young niece, sat nearby, her eyes wide but evasive, twisting a delicate handkerchief between her fingers. Mr. Blake, the family lawyer, remained standing by the mantelpiece, adjusting his glasses with nervous precision. And finally, there was Mrs. Carrington, the housekeeper, a woman of stern demeanor but sharp eyes, silently observing everything. "The matter is grave," Lady Vivienne began. "During the weekend gathering, my family's most treasured possession, an ancient golden amulet, passed down through generations, was taken. No one saw the theft occur. Yet, I am certain it happened within these walls. And now," she paused, her eyes glistening, "there is unrest among us. Suspicion is rising, and I fear the situation will only worsen unless someone, like yourself, Monsieur Poirot, intervenes." Poirot nodded, steepling his fingers. "Ah, madam, the amulet. And do you wish me to find it, n'est-ce pas?" He allowed a faint smile to touch his lips. "Mais oui. The case is indeed most intriguing. Pray, tell me, when was it last seen?" Lady Vivienne indicated a small, ornate cabinet near the hearth. "It was here, on the evening before last. Edward, Clara, and I were all in the room, and yet none of us noticed it had vanished until the following morning. There is no sign of forced entry, no window or door was disturbed. It is as though it simply disappeared." Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. he circled the cabinet, examining the lock and the surface. The polished wood was unmarred, and the lock showed no trace of tampering. He bent slightly, inspecting the surrounding floor and rugs. Dust, slightly displaced, clung to the edge of the carpet. A faint trace of a smell caught his keen nose, almonds. Curious, he murmured under his breath. Traces, subtle, but meaningful. Very well, we shall speak with each member of the household. He began with Edward, who seemed reluctant but courteous. Poirot's questions were precise, not confrontational. Where were you between 8 and 10 on the evening the amulet disappeared? He asked, observing Edward's posture, tone, and micro-expressions. The young man hesitated, glanced at the fire, then replied, I was in the library. Reading. Poirot noted the faint scent of smoke on his clothes. A detail, he thought. A small lie or an honest distraction. Time would reveal it. Clara was next. Poirot approached her with gentle, disarming charm. And you, mademoiselle, what were your movements that same evening? Her hands twisted nervously. I was in the conservatory, arranging flowers. Poirot's eyes, sharp and calculating, caught the discrepancy. Her hair smelled faintly of tobacco, not of blossoms. Yet she was not acting aggressively or defensive, simply nervous. A psychological clue, subtle but telling. Finally, he questioned Mr. Blake, the lawyer. The man adjusted his glasses repeatedly, his fingers trembling slightly as he recounted his evening. Poirot observed his body language with meticulous care, the tightening of the jaw, the avoidance of certain words, the way his gaze flickered toward the cabinet and then away. He would not draw a conclusion yet, but the little grey cells were already working, weaving a tapestry of subtle indications. Mrs. Carrington, ever perceptive, added her own observations. I heard footsteps, Monsieur Poirot. Not in the hall, but in the corridors at night. Light, careful steps, but deliberate. She spoke calmly, yet her eyes betrayed her unease. Poirot's attention sharpened, footsteps, faint almond scent, clean locks, and subtle dust disturbance. Each seemingly minor detail was a thread waiting to be drawn into the broader pattern of the mystery. After speaking with the household, Poirot took a moment to examine the room once more, alone. He studied the light filtering through the heavy drapes, the alignment of furniture, and the portraits that seemed to watch silently. He measured angles with his eyes, noting the way shadows fell at different hours. Yes, he murmured. The truth will emerge, but patience, patience. The human mind is often as tangled as the moorland outside, yet all confusion can be unravelled by careful observation. Lady Vivienne returned to his side, wringing her hands. Do you believe it can be found, Monsieur Poirot? She asked, voice trembling. Poirot smiled gently, with that quiet confidence he always carried. Madam, in my experience, no theft is perfect, and no criminal is flawless. The amulet has not vanished into the ether, it remains within reach of those whose little grey cells guide me. You have faith in me, n'est-ce pas? She nodded, relief flickering across her face. Yes, I trust you. Please, Monsieur Poirot, uncover the truth. Poirot inclined his head, his eyes bright and calculating. Very well, madam. Then let the investigation begin. As he walked through the manor, noting every sound, scent, and detail, Poirot felt the familiar thrill of the hunt. Hawthorn Manor, with its heavy atmosphere and silent corridors, promised a challenge worthy of his skills. The first threads of the mystery were already visible, though their full pattern remained hidden. And somewhere, among these anxious and careful souls, the truth awaited him, ready to be revealed, if only he could untangle the subtle web of deception, fear, and human error. And so, the game was set. The mist hung thick over the moor, but Poirot's keen mind cut through it with precision, for he knew nothing escapes the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot. Chapter 2: Clues and Conversations. The morning sun struggled to pierce the dense fog that still clung to the moors surrounding Hawthorn Manor. Within the house, a quiet tension hung over breakfast. Lady Vivienne Hawthorn moved about with careful precision, her hands never still, while Edward sipped his tea with a tightness in his jaw. Clara, seated opposite him, stirred her own cup absent-mindedly, her gaze occasionally flicking toward the windows as if expecting someone, or something, to appear. Poirot observed all of this from his place at the table. He had begun to settle into his usual rhythm, calm, attentive, and endlessly observant. Every gesture, every inflection of voice, every fleeting glance was a piece of the larger puzzle. "Miss Amos," he murmured to himself, "the truth is hidden not in the grand gestures, but in the tiniest details." He began his inquiries with Edward. "Tell me, young man," Poirot said in his soft, deliberate voice, "since your arrival at Hawthorn Manor, have you noticed anything unusual? Anything out of place, perhaps?" Edward hesitated. His fingers tightened around the teacup, and his eyes darted briefly to the corner of the room, where shadows seemed to linger longer than they should. I can't say anything specific," he stammered. "But I thought I heard footsteps in the corridor last night. Faint, deliberate, though I may have imagined them." Poirot's eyebrows arched slightly. "Ah, footsteps," he said, nodding. "And were they slow? Fast? Heavy?" Edward frowned, thinking carefully. "Slow, measured, but not clumsy. Someone walking with intent." Poirot's lips twitched in a faint smile. "Exactment. Every step tells a story, monsieur. The rhythm of movement, the intention behind it, the purpose hidden in a simple step. You see, we are already making progress." Next, he spoke with Clara. Her fingers continued to twist the delicate handkerchief as she tried to maintain composure. "Mademoiselle Clara, where were you last evening after dinner?" Poirot asked, leaning slightly forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "In the conservatory," she replied softly. "Arranging flowers, as usual." Her voice was steady, but Poirot noticed a subtle tremor in her hands and a faint trace of a scent that did not belong. Smoke, very light, almost imperceptible. "Smoke," Poirot murmured under his breath. Then he looked up at her, fixing her with a gentle but penetrating gaze. "Yes, mademoiselle. Smoke. Not the fragrance of blossoms, none, but smoke. A detail, perhaps trivial to others, yet important. And what, pray, is your opinion of the amulet's disappearance?" Clara swallowed and looked away. I don't know who could have taken it. But I feel uneasy. Something is wrong, and I can sense it, though I cannot explain how." Poirot inclined his head, noting her subtle anxiety. "Unease is often a reliable indicator, n'est-ce pas? When one senses something amiss, even without knowing why, the instincts speak where reason hesitates." Finally, he addressed Mr. Blake, who stood with his hands clasped nervously behind his back. "Monsieur Blake, as the family's legal advisor, you must have been aware of the amulet's value." Blake adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "Yes, I was aware. But I assure you, Monsieur Poirot, I would never." He paused, his fingers brushing a small spot on the table absent-mindedly, leaving a faint fingerprint. Poirot's sharp eyes caught it immediately. "A minor detail, but telling." "Of course," Poirot said softly. "I ask only to understand the circumstances. Tell me, did you observe any unusual behavior among the household during the past few days?" Blake's eyes flickered to the cabinet where the amulet had been kept. Well, I suppose Edward seemed distracted, and Clara, she was quieter than usual." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "Very well. Observation noted. And tell me, Monsieur Blake, did you yourself notice anything unusual last night? Blake hesitated, then shook his head. Nothing of significance, I assure you. Poirot's small grey cells were already at work, piecing together fragments of truth from these subtle admissions. The young man's nervous glances, the faint smell of smoke on Clara, and the unusual movements in the corridors, all threads that, if properly followed, would form the pattern of the crime. After breakfast, Poirot requested a private tour of the rooms where the amulet had been displayed. The drawing room was large, with high ceilings and heavy curtains that muffled the morning light. He examined the cabinet closely, running his fingers along the polished wood. The lock showed no sign of tampering. Dust along the edges of the cabinet was slightly disturbed, suggesting movement, but by whom, and for what purpose, he did not yet know. He then moved to the windows and examined the sills, the curtains, and the tracks in the carpet below. Faint scuff marks were visible near the hearth. He sniffed discreetly and caught the subtle hint of almonds again, a detail easily missed by anyone less observant. As Poirot worked, Mrs. Carrington appeared silently at the doorway. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady but firm, "I heard movement in the corridors last night. Not in the drawing room, but above, near the bedrooms. Footsteps, careful but purposeful. I did not see anyone, but I sensed intent. And something else." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, Madame Carrington, you sense what is hidden. Please, tell me what else." "I heard a whisper," she said quietly. "Someone speaking softly, almost a chant. I could not understand the words, but it was deliberate." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "Very good, madam. The details, even the faintest, are most revealing. Step, scent, whisper, all threads to be woven into a complete tapestry." He spent the remainder of the morning visiting the library, the conservatory, and the hallways, examining small clues and subtle inconsistencies. A torn piece of fabric lay near the hearth, insignificant at first glance, but Poirot noted its peculiar texture. It matched no clothing he had seen that morning. A half-burnt candle in the fireplace emitted the faint scent of almonds, reinforcing his suspicions. By midday, Poirot gathered the family in the drawing room. "Miss Amos," he began in his deliberate, precise manner, "we have much to consider. Small details, seemingly trivial, will guide us toward the truth. I have noted footsteps, smells, and subtle disturbances. But we must observe, listen, and remain patient. The thief is clever, very clever, but not clever enough to escape entirely. There is no hasty action, only careful reasoning will reveal the guilty party." Lady Vivienne nodded, a mixture of relief and anxiety in her expression. "Monsieur Poirot, I trust you. Please uncover the truth before more harm comes to my family." Poirot inclined his head, calm yet sharp-eyed. "Do not worry, madam. The case has begun, and already the threads of deceit are visible to the discerning eye. Patience, observation, and logic, these are the keys, Miss Amos. The amulet will be found, and the truth, in its proper place, revealed." As the family dispersed to attend to their day, Poirot remained in the drawing room, examining the cabinet once more. He traced the edges of the wood with his fingers, sniffed subtly at the faint almond scent, and considered every tiny detail, the alignment of furniture, the disturbed dust, the subtle psychological signs of each family member. "Yes," he murmured to himself, "the game is indeed afoot. And Hawthorn Manor shall reveal its secrets, one by one. Patience, Monsieur Poirot, patience, for the truth, as always, lies hidden in the little things." With that, Poirot prepared for a day of careful observation, questioning, and deduction. Outside, the mist lifted slowly, revealing the dark outlines of the moor, windswept and wild. Within the manor, the air was thick with secrets, fear, and suspicion, but Poirot's calm, penetrating mind was already unraveling the threads, ready to illuminate the truth hidden in the shadows. Chapter 3: The First Incident. The morning after Poirot's initial inquiries, a strange unease pervaded Hawthorn Manor. The usual clatter of servants and quiet domestic routines was absent. The household moved with a tense, measured silence. Poirot, however, remained his calm, precise self, strolling through the corridors with his small, neat steps, observing each detail with the sharp intensity that defined his investigations. Breakfast had passed uneventfully, though each family member's mood seemed increasingly strained. Lady Vivienne moved with forced composure, Edward sat with a rigid posture and a pale, troubled expression, and Clara appeared restless, glancing repeatedly toward the windows as though expecting a visitor, or intruder, to appear from the fog outside. Poirot had retired to the drawing-room to examine the cabinet where the amulet had been displayed. He noted the faint, lingering scent of almond still clinging to the wood, a subtle but meaningful clue. He also observed the disturbed dust along the edges of the carpet, the slight scuff near the hearth, and the way the sunlight fell unevenly across the floor. Every detail was a thread, waiting to be woven into the greater tapestry of truth. As he bent slightly to inspect the cabinet more closely, a piercing scream suddenly rang out from the main staircase. Poirot's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed with calculated focus. He rose immediately, moving swiftly toward the source, his mind already considering all possibilities. Lady Vivienne's voice quavered as she called from the top of the stairs. "Oh! Mistral! Mistral!" The household rushed into the hall, and there, at the foot of the staircase, lay the Persian cat, Mistral, motionless. Its fur, usually sleek and glossy, was matted with a dark stain along one side. Poirot knelt beside the small creature, examining it carefully without disturbing the scene. He noted several things immediately. The cat's paws were clean, its body position suggested it had been placed or dropped deliberately, and there were faint scratch marks on the carpet, as though something, or someone, had dragged it a short distance. He sniffed subtly near the body, catching again the faint trace of almonds. "Ah," he murmured softly, almost to himself. "A clue, or a warning." Lady Vivienne wept quietly, kneeling beside the cat. Edward and Clara exchanged worried glances, while Mr. Blake remained motionless, adjusting his glasses with an almost imperceptible tremor in his fingers. Mrs. Carrington, the housekeeper, stood silently, her face a mask of controlled concern but her eyes sharp, taking in every detail. Poirot rose and addressed the room in his deliberate, precise manner. "Miss Amos, let us remain calm. It is not merely a domestic misfortune, it is a signal. Someone within this household desires to unsettle us, to create fear, and perhaps, to distract us from the greater crime." Edward, his voice tight with frustration, spoke first. "A cat? You think this is connected to the amulet? Surely it is coincidence." Poirot shook his head gently. "No, young man. Nothing is coincidence. Every action leaves a trace, every gesture, a meaning. The cat, the smell, the scuff marks, all of these are messages, deliberate and intentional. We must observe carefully, with intelligence, not emotion." He examined the hall thoroughly. The carpet showed traces of movement that were not consistent with normal foot traffic. Small marks on the banister indicated a brief, perhaps hurried, contact, yet no forceful handling. Poirot traced his finger along the edges of the steps and found an almost imperceptible smear, suggesting someone had brushed against it while carrying something, or perhaps someone. Mrs. Carrington, observing quietly, finally spoke. "I heard footsteps, Monsieur Poirot. Above, in the corridor near the bedrooms. And now this. Someone is moving with purpose, unseen, yet very present." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "Indeed, madam. And notice this, the faint smell of almonds remains in the air, particularly near the base of the stairs. That is not accidental. The thief, if thief there is, uses subtlety, precision, and psychology. Fear is as much a weapon as any hand. This is not merely theft, it is manipulation. He paused, surveying the faces around him. Edward appeared tense, as though struggling to control a sudden surge of anger. Clara's hands twisted nervously, her gaze flickering to the windows as if the fog itself were watching her. Blake adjusted his glasses, avoiding eye contact with Poirot. Lady Vivienne dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, her expression a mixture of grief and worry. Poirot returned to the cat, kneeling once more. He gently lifted Mistral's paw, noting the cleanliness, the slight stiffness in the joints, and the absence of natural trauma. No accidental fall, he murmured. This was deliberate. And it was meant to convey a message, perhaps even a threat. Observe the pattern, the amulet disappears, followed by the cat's death. The sequence is psychological, designed to unsettle, to distract, and to manipulate human reactions. He rose and spoke to the household. We must examine the scene carefully. Edward, I wish to see your movements last night. Clara, you as well. Monsieur Blake, your presence is required. And madam, please remain calm. The details are vital, the emotions, though understandable, are less important. Edward hesitated but eventually explained that he had retired early to his room, yet had been disturbed by a strange feeling of unease, as though someone were watching. Clara admitted she had been in the conservatory, arranging flowers, yet had been interrupted by a noise she could not identify. Blake stated he had worked late in his chambers, yet his movements seemed evasive, the subtle tremor in his hands betraying tension. Poirot observed them all carefully, noting the inconsistencies in their statements. Attention, Miss Amis, he said softly. Details, small details, shall reveal much. Edward's feet, clean though he claims to have walked the halls. Clara scent, tobacco, though she was among flowers. And Monsieur Blake, the smallest tremor indicates that even the calmest face can mask agitation. He then turned to Mrs. Carrington. Madam, I wish you to recount the sequence of sounds you heard last night. Every footstep, every whisper, every subtle disturbance. She described the soft, careful footsteps, beginning from the upper corridor and moving down toward the drawing room. Poirot noted the precise intervals, the measured rhythm, and the subtle pauses, reconstructing the movement in his mind. The footsteps were deliberate, controlled, and executed with knowledge of the household's routines. After careful analysis, Poirot addressed the household. Miss Amis, we are dealing with a mind both clever and patient. The theft of the amulet was not spontaneous, the death of the cat is not accidental. Both acts are intended to obscure, to frighten, and to control. Yet even in subtlety, the truth leaves traces. And these traces, he tapped his temple lightly, are observed by the little grey cells. Lady Vivienne's voice trembled. But what shall we do, Monsieur Poirot? What can be done to protect ourselves? Poirot smiled faintly, a serene, confident smile that seemed to calm the tension. Patience, madam. Observation, reflection, and reason shall guide us. The thief is clever, yes, but the cleverest are never without flaw. We shall wait, watch, and gather more details. Soon, the pattern shall reveal itself, and the truth shall be undeniable. As he left the hall, moving toward the corridors for further examination, Poirot's mind raced with possibilities. Each footstep, each scent, each subtle disturbance was a piece of the puzzle. The morning mist outside was lifting, yet inside Hawthorn Manor, the fog of uncertainty remained thick. Somewhere within these walls, a deliberate mind moved carefully, leaving clues for those observant enough to notice. Poirot's keen eyes followed the faint disturbances in the dust, the unusual alignment of objects, the subtle marks on the carpet. Slowly, methodically, he began to map the actions of the unseen perpetrator. The amulet had been stolen, Mistral had been killed, but the story was far from complete. The threads of deception were weaving themselves into a larger, more dangerous pattern. And Poirot, calm and collected, knew one thing with certainty: the first incident was merely the beginning. Chapter 4: A Hidden Secrets. The day after the unsettling incident with Mistral, Hawthorn Manor seemed to hold its breath. The air was heavy, laden with tension, and even the servants moved quietly, as though afraid to disturb some invisible presence. Poirot, however, walked with his usual calm precision, his eyes alert to every minor detail, every subtle irregularity. The disappearance of the amulet and the death of Mistral had been merely the overt acts, the overture to a more intricate mystery. He began the day by retracing his steps from the previous evening, inspecting the drawing room, the hall, and the staircase. He examined the cabinet once more, noting the faint traces of dust along the edges and the subtle alignment of its lock. No signs of forced entry. The faint almond scent remained, delicate but persistent, lingering as a quiet reminder of human intervention. Poirot murmured to himself, the clever thief leaves marks even when he believes he has left none. After careful scrutiny, Poirot requested the housekeeper, Mrs. Carrington, to accompany him to the study. There, he examined the large oak desk and its surrounding shelves. His eyes were drawn to a faint outline along the baseboard, an unusual seam that did not align with the other panels. Kneeling, he ran his hand along it and found a small, almost imperceptible catch. With a gentle push, a hidden panel swung open, revealing a shallow drawer concealed within the wall. Inside lay several letters, carefully folded and addressed to Mr. Blake, the family lawyer. Poirot handled them with meticulous care, noting the elegant handwriting and the cryptic tone of the messages. They spoke of the amulet's considerable monetary value, of a plan to acquire it without raising suspicion, and of the rewards awaiting the recipient. The letters suggested premeditation, and more importantly, they implicated someone with intimate knowledge of the household's routines. Poirot did not reveal his discovery immediately. Instead, he noted the subtle psychological implications. The letters, written with care, suggested a mind that was both calculating and patient. The thief had planned the theft long before the amulet vanished and had even taken measures to manipulate the household through fear, as seen in the deliberate killing of Mistral. After a brief consultation with Mrs. Carrington, Poirot requested a tour of the house from the perspective of the intruder. He walked along the corridors, noting the slight wear in the floorboards, the subtle differences in the dust along the edges, and the alignment of furniture near key locations. He discovered what he had suspected, a narrow, almost invisible passage behind a series of portraits in the drawing room. This passage connected the drawing room to the servant quarters, allowing someone to move unseen between floors and rooms. "Ah, Miss Amos," Poirot murmured to himself, "clever, very clever. But not clever enough." He returned to the letters, studying each word, each nuance, and the timing implied by the correspondence. The tone suggested desperation disguised as calm and patience, a mind seeking control over events. The handwriting, elegant and deliberate, indicated someone accustomed to careful planning and attention to detail. Poirot's little grey cells worked tirelessly, piecing together the connections between the letters, the hidden passage, and the sequence of events. By afternoon, Poirot gathered the family in the drawing room once more. Lady Vivienne, her composure fragile but determined, sat with her hands clasped tightly. Edward and Clara were present, as was Mr. Blake, whose nervous energy was now more pronounced. Mrs. Carrington stood quietly in the background, observing the interactions with a keen eye. "Miss Amos," Poirot began, his voice calm yet imbued with authority, "we are beginning to understand the nature of the events that have disturbed Hawthorn Manor. The amulet's disappearance is not a random act, nor is the death of Mistral a simple accident. Both actions are deliberate, calculated, and psychologically manipulative." Edward frowned. "But who could do such things? Why? Surely you cannot mean someone here." Poirot's gaze was steady. "Ah, young man, you misunderstand. The thief is clever, yes, but one does not need to look beyond the walls of this house. Look closely at the details: footsteps, dust, scent, behavior, and secret correspondences. The pattern is entirely contained within the household. And the letters I have discovered suggest a plan, premeditated and deliberate, executed by someone with knowledge of this house and its routines." Clara's hands trembled slightly. "But Mr. Blake, surely you cannot suspect him." Poirot's eyes twinkled faintly. "Patience, mademoiselle. Observation is the key. Suspicion is not accusation, it is a tool to guide understanding. Mr. Blake is involved, yes, but not in the way you imagine. One must examine the letters, the hidden passage, and the sequence of actions to comprehend the true mind behind these acts." He then addressed Mrs. Carrington. "Madam, you heard footsteps, yes? And whispering?" "Yes, Monsieur Poirot," she replied. "Soft, deliberate, almost chant-like. Moving from the upper corridor to the drawing room, precise in rhythm and timing." Poirot nodded. "Exactly. And consider this, the hidden passage behind the portraits. It allows movement unseen by ordinary observation. Combined with the precise timing, the use of scent, and the psychological pressure, we are looking at a criminal mind that is methodical, clever, and aware of human nature." Lady Vivienne's eyes widened. "And the letters? What do they tell you?" Poirot opened the drawer carefully and displayed the letters to the assembled household. "Observe, Miss Amos. These letters speak of a plot to acquire the amulet and of instructions on avoiding suspicion. They also reveal knowledge of the household's patterns and routines. Whoever wrote these had time, patience, and intention. And they acted when the opportunity was perfect, knowing the household would not notice until it was too late." Edward leaned forward. "But it doesn't make sense. Who would do this?" Poirot's voice was calm, deliberate, and firm. "Ah, that is precisely the question. Who would act with patience, cunning, and intimate knowledge of the household? Who would manipulate events to frighten and confuse, leaving only subtle traces for those observant enough to follow? The answer lies not in haste or conjecture, but in careful observation, logical deduction, and psychological analysis. The guilty party is near, yes, but the evidence must be assembled carefully." He then returned the letters to their hidden drawer, closing it quietly. "Now, we wait. Observation, patience, and attention to detail shall reveal the next move." The first act, the theft of the amulet and the death of Mistral, was but the opening. The sequence is deliberate, and the criminal has confidence, believing no one can see. But we see, Miss Amos. We observe. And we shall follow every trace, every clue, until the truth is fully revealed. The household remained silent, absorbing Poirot's words. Fear, unease, and tension mingled with a growing sense of hope. For while the events were troubling, there was also reassurance in Poirot's methodical, unshakable confidence. He moved with precision and calm, unearthing hidden clues and illuminating the web of deceit that threatened to engulf Hawthorn Manor. As he walked alone through the corridors later that evening, Poirot reflected on the discoveries. The letters, the hidden panel, the narrow passage, and the subtle psychological manipulations, all pointed toward a criminal mind both clever and patient. But cleverness alone would not protect the guilty from the penetrating eye of Poirot. "Yes," he murmured softly, his moustache twitching with satisfaction, "the threads are appearing. The pattern is emerging. And the little grey cells shall untangle them, revealing the mind behind the scheme. Hawthorn Manor holds its secret still, but soon, the hidden truth shall come to light." Outside, the fog drifted low across the moor and the last light of day faded behind the distant hills. Inside, Hawthorn Manor remained tense and silent, its walls bearing witness to the careful observations of a man whose genius lay in noticing what others overlooked. The first threads had been uncovered, and the next stage of the investigation was about to begin. Chapter 5: Another Attack. Evening had fallen over Hawthorn Manor, and the mist lay heavy upon the moors like a shroud. Inside the house, the atmosphere was thick with unease. The events of the previous days, the disappearance of the amulet, the tragic death of Mistral, and the discovery of hidden letters and passages, had left the household tense and wary. Every creak of a floorboard, every whisper of wind against the windows, seemed amplified in the minds of those within the walls. Poirot, as always, moved with calm precision. He had spent the day retracing the previous incidents, studying the letters, the hidden passage, and the subtle patterns of movement within the manor. Each observation was meticulously recorded in his mind, as he sought to assemble the threads into a coherent understanding of the criminal mind at work. By nightfall, however, a new incident shattered the uneasy calm. A small fire had broken out in the greenhouse. Though quickly contained, it caused significant concern. The greenhouse was not merely decorative, it contained certain documents of minor financial importance, which were now partially charred and at risk of destruction. The smell of smoke, mingling with the scent of flowers and damp earth, hung thick in the manor's corridors. Poirot arrived promptly, assessing the damage with his usual thoroughness. The fire had not been accidental. The careful placement of a candle and the slight scorch marks near specific papers indicated deliberate intent. Someone had sought to destroy evidence, or perhaps to frighten the household further. He examined the remnants of the papers, lifting fragments carefully. Some bore the Hawthorn family seal, others were letters from financial institutions, detailing assets and minor inheritances. "Ah," Poirot murmured, his moustache twitching slightly. "The criminal is meticulous, yes, but not perfect. Even the cleverest mind leaves traces." Lady Vivienne, her hands trembling as she clutched a lace handkerchief, looked at Poirot anxiously. "Monsieur Poirot, what does this mean?" "Another attack, another sign that we are helpless." Poirot shook his head gently. "Non, madam. This is not a sign of helplessness. It is a signal, yes, a deliberate attempt to frighten and distract. But fear is a tool. The criminal relies on emotion, not reason. We, however, shall act with reason, observation, and patience." He examined the greenhouse itself. The placement of the candle, the absence of footprints near certain areas, and the slight disturbance in the soil beneath some flower pots all suggested careful planning. Poirot traced each step mentally, reconstructing the likely sequence of events. "Ah, the criminal moves with precision," he murmured, "and yet, even precision cannot escape observation. Footsteps, movement, subtle traces, they remain." Poirot then convened the household in the drawing room once more. Edward and Clara sat together, their expressions tense and uncertain. Mr. Blake remained near the mantelpiece, adjusting his glasses with the faintest tremor in his fingers. Mrs. Carrington, as always, observed silently, her eyes keen and calculating. Lady Vivienne, still shaken by the fire, clutched the edges of her chair. "Miss Amos," Poirot began, his voice calm but authoritative, "we are dealing with a mind that is both clever and deliberate. The fire in the greenhouse is no accident. It is part of a calculated sequence designed to obscure, intimidate, and control. The sequence begins with the theft of the amulet, follows with the death of Mistral, and now this. Each act is deliberate, each detail meaningful." Edward frowned. "But why? What does the criminal hope to gain from frightening us?" Poirot's gaze was steady. "Ah, young man, manipulation is often more important than gain. Fear clouds judgment. When reason is obscured by panic, mistakes are made. And the criminal's plan progresses unhindered. The clever mind uses human nature itself as an instrument." Clara's voice trembled slightly. "Do you mean that the fire, and the cat, were intended to frighten us, to make us easier to deceive. Poirot nodded. Exactment, mademoiselle. But notice the details. The fire targeted only specific documents, leaving others untouched. It was controlled, deliberate, and psychologically motivated. The criminal is patient, calculating, and aware of human behavior. Observe the pattern, and you shall see intention. He then addressed Mr. Blake. Monsieur Blake, you have knowledge of the household's assets and movements. Did you notice any irregularities today, or anything that might suggest planning? Blake hesitated, his fingers brushing nervously against the mantelpiece. I cannot say I noticed anything specific, Monsieur Poirot. But there was a smell in the air, faint, unusual. Like almonds. Poirot's eyes lit up. Ah, the smell, yes. Faint but persistent. This is no coincidence. The use of scent is deliberate, a signature, perhaps, or a psychological cue. The criminal leaves traces, believing they are subtle, but in reality they are observable to the discerning eye. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle upon the household. We must remain calm, patient, and vigilant. Observation, Miss Amos, will reveal the sequence, and the sequence will reveal the criminal. Every action, every trace, every subtle hint is a thread in the tapestry. And the tapestry shall guide us to the truth. Poirot spent the remainder of the evening examining the greenhouse once more, noting the precise placement of flower pots, the scorch marks, and the faint footprints in the damp soil. He reconstructed the likely movements of the intruder, considering timing, direction, and intent. Each observation was meticulously recorded in his mind, added to the growing picture of a careful, intelligent, and calculating criminal. Later, when the household had retired, Poirot remained in the drawing room, reviewing the day's discoveries. The letters from the hidden drawer, the secret passage, the almond scent, the cat's death, and now the greenhouse fire, all pointed to a mind that was clever, patient, and aware of human psychology. The criminal sought not merely to steal, but to manipulate and control. Yes, Poirot murmured, steepling his fingers, the pattern is clear. But the truth, Miss Amos, is never revealed at once. The threads must be followed carefully, woven together patiently, and observed with the utmost care. Then, and only then, shall the criminal be revealed. He paused, glancing at the fading light through the tall windows of the drawing room. Outside, the fog rolled in again over the moor, cloaking the landscape in shadow and mystery. Inside, the manor remained tense, alert, and watchful. The fire, though contained, had intensified the sense of danger and anticipation. Poirot, however, remained serene, his mind sharp and untroubled. Patience, he whispered to himself, observation, and logic. The criminal is clever, but the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot are sharper still. The next move shall reveal more, and each clue, subtle as it may be, will lead inexorably to the truth. The evening drew on, and the household retired with uneasy sleep, the event of the day weighing heavily on their minds. Yet Poirot remained in the drawing room, a calm, vigilant presence amid the storm of fear and uncertainty. Outside, the fog deepened, the wind whispered through the trees, and Hawthorn Manor held its secrets tightly. But Poirot, as ever, was ready to unravel them, one meticulous observation at a time. Chapter 6, Red Herrings. The day after the greenhouse fire, Hawthorn Manor seemed almost unnaturally still. The mist clung to the moors like a thick woolen blanket, muffling sound and heightening the tension that already pervaded the household. Even the servants moved with caution, their eyes darting nervously toward the drawing room and the staircase, as if expecting some invisible danger to emerge. Poirot, however, remained calm and measured, walking the corridors with his habitual precision. His small, neat steps made no sound on the polished floors, yet his eyes caught every detail, the smallest scuff, the faintest disturbance in dust, the alignment of objects, the subtle tension in each person's posture. For Poirot, nothing was incidental, everything carried meaning. Breakfast was a subdued affair. Lady Vivienne Hawthorn moved carefully about the table, her hands trembling ever so slightly as she poured tea. Edward sat stiffly, his jaw tight and pale, while Clara toyed nervously with her napkin, her eyes constantly flicking toward the windows. Mr. Blake seemed unnaturally alert, adjusting his glasses repeatedly and avoiding eye contact with Poirot. Mrs. Carrington, the housekeeper, observed quietly, her face impassive but her eyes keen, noting every expression, every movement. After breakfast, Poirot convened the family in the drawing-room. "Miss Amos," he began, his voice calm yet commanding, "today we must be particularly vigilant. The criminal's intelligence is evident, and they are capable of misdirection. Therefore, we must examine every clue with care and caution. We shall begin by reviewing the sequence of events and the observations made to date." He recounted the theft of the amulet, the death of Mistral, and the deliberate fire in the greenhouse, pausing at each point to highlight the subtle clues: dust disturbance, the faint scent of almonds, the hidden passage behind the portraits, and the letters discovered in the secret drawer. The family listened attentively, though anxiety and fear were evident in their expressions. Edward spoke first, his voice edged with frustration. "Monsieur Poirot, I cannot see how all this points to anyone here. Surely it could be an outsider, a thief, or some stranger who slipped in unnoticed." Poirot shook his head gently. "Non, jeune homme. Observe carefully. The sequence, the precision, the psychological manipulation, all point to someone familiar with the house, its routines, and its inhabitants. An outsider would struggle to achieve such subtlety. The criminal's knowledge is intimate, and the errors, though small, are entirely consistent with someone who is both familiar and clever." Clara interjected, her voice soft but anxious. "Then you are saying it must be someone in the household?" "Yes, mademoiselle," Poirot replied. "And this is why we must be cautious. Clever criminals often rely on red herrings, deliberate distractions intended to confuse, to mislead, and to divert suspicion from themselves. Today, we shall examine several such possible misdirections." He began by inspecting Edward's room. Subtle marks in the dust suggested movement during the night, though they were inconsistent with Edward's claimed schedule. Poirot noted the faint traces of soil on the carpet near the window, a detail suggesting possible outdoor activity. Yet it was inconsistent with the other evidence: no footprints led to or from the window, and the soil's placement suggested careful placement rather than accidental tracking. A classic red herring, designed to draw attention while concealing the true path of the intruder. Next, Poirot examined Clara's room. A small drawer was slightly ajar, containing letters and personal effects. He observed that a few letters had been moved, though their content seemed innocuous. The displacement was deliberate, a subtle attempt to appear suspicious. Clara's anxiety over the amulet and Mistral was genuine, yet the movement of objects in her room suggested that someone else had attempted to direct suspicion toward her. Finally, he visited Mr. Blake's study. The room was orderly, almost meticulously so, yet Poirot's trained eyes detected a faint inconsistency. The alignment of books on a shelf was slightly irregular, suggesting that a book had recently been removed and replaced. Additionally, a faint residue of almond scent lingered near the desk. While it was tempting to assume guilt, Poirot considered the possibility that these were deliberate distractions, red herrings, planted to confuse any observer and protect the true criminal. Returning to the drawing room, Poirot addressed the household once more. "Miss Amos, today we confront the reality of misdirection. A clever mind may plant false clues to divert attention from the truth. Observe Edward's room, soil and dust, suggestive of outdoor movement. Observe Clara's room, displaced letters implying secret action. Observe Monsieur Blake's study, altered book alignment and subtle scent of almonds. All these details are misleading if taken without careful analysis. And yet, within each misdirection, clues to the truth remain, if observed correctly." Edward frowned. But if everything could be a red herring, how can we know what is real? Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, jeune homme, this is the very art of detection. Red herrings exist to confound the mind, yet the truth leaves a consistency that cannot be masked. Consider the sequence of events, the psychological pressure, the subtle traces, dust, scent, footsteps, and hidden passages. The criminal's hand is visible, despite attempts to obscure it. Observation, patience, and reason will reveal it. Clara, still uneasy, asked, and the cat, and the fire? Were those red herrings as well? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Not red herrings, mademoiselle, but deliberate signals. They distract, yes, but they also reveal patterns. A clever mind uses emotion, fear, anxiety, distress, to manipulate others. The criminal counts on reaction to guide suspicion away from themselves. Yet the careful observer, he who sees beyond immediate emotion, can follow the sequence and recognize the true path. Poirot then outlined a careful plan for the day. The household would maintain normal routines while he conducted discreet surveillance, observing movements, interactions, and subtle behavioral cues. Every action would be noted, every hesitation or nervous glance recorded mentally. He paid particular attention to body language, Edward's clenched hands, Clara's twitching fingers, Blake's repeated adjustments of his glasses, and Lady Vivienne's fragile but tense composure. By mid-afternoon, an incident occurred that proved Poirot's point. A servant reported that a small jewelry box, containing costume pieces, not the amulet, was missing from the drawing room. Panic flared briefly among the household. Edward immediately suspected Clara. Clara looked toward Edward with indignation, Blake adjusted his glasses and avoided eye contact, and Lady Vivienne clutched her handkerchief in distress. Poirot observed carefully, noting minute details, Edward's hesitation in speaking, Clara's instinctive withdrawal, Blake's subtle tension, and Lady Vivienne's flustered movements. Yet he also noticed small contradictions. The trajectory of the box suggested it had been moved deliberately, but not necessarily by the person who appeared most nervous. Subtle marks in the dust and the faint scent of almonds indicated the intruder's path. Miss Amos, Poirot said calmly, observe. The box is not the object of desire. Its disappearance is a red herring, designed to draw attention and provoke suspicion. The true path remains invisible to those who react emotionally. But to the careful observer, the trace is visible. By evening, Poirot had reconstructed the sequence of events. He gathered the household once more and spoke with quiet authority. Today we have seen how the clever mind employs misdirection. Soil, dust, displaced letters, altered book alignment, and even minor thefts, all are intended to confuse and manipulate. Yet in every act, patterns remain. Observation, logic, and patience will reveal the criminal. Red herrings may mislead the mind temporarily, but the truth cannot be hidden indefinitely. The household remained silent, absorbing Poirot's words. Fear, uncertainty, and suspicion mingled, yet there was also a sense of reassurance. For while the criminal's cleverness was evident, Poirot's methodical and calm approach promised eventual clarity. Later that evening, Poirot retired to the drawing room alone. He examined the subtle traces, the dust, the faint scent of almonds, the misaligned book, the altered letters. Slowly, carefully, the threads began to weave together in his mind. Red herrings were exposed as distractions, yet within each, clues to the truth were embedded. Yes, Poirot murmured softly, the path is obscured, but not hidden. The criminal believes themselves clever, but the little grey cells are always vigilant. Patience, observation, and reason, these shall reveal the truth. Hawthorn Manor holds its secrets, yet the pattern is forming, and soon, Miss Amos, the sequence shall be clear. Outside, the fog rolled in again across the moors. Inside, the manor remained tense, alert, and watchful. And Poirot, calm, precise, and unshakable, continued his meticulous study, confident that each red herring would ultimately lead him closer to the ultimate revelation. Chapter 7: The Culprit's Move. The following morning, a brittle light filtered through the tall windows of Hawthorn Manor, illuminating the mist still clinging stubbornly to the surrounding moors. Inside, a tense hush permeated the household. Everyone seemed acutely aware that the events of the previous days, the theft of the amulet, the death of Mistral, the greenhouse fire, and the misleading red herrings, had created a situation in which one wrong move might trigger disaster. Poirot, however, moved with deliberate calm, his small, precise steps carrying him from room to room, observing, noting, and analyzing. The little grey cells were hard at work, weaving together the threads of the mystery, while his keen eyes detected subtleties invisible to any ordinary observer. Breakfast passed in an uneasy silence. Lady Vivienne poured tea with trembling hands, Edward pushed his food around his plate absent-mindedly, and Clara's gaze continually flicked toward the windows. Mr. Blake, unusually alert, adjusted his glasses repeatedly, his fingers brushing the edge of the table in a nervous rhythm. Mrs. Carrington remained composed, yet her eyes betrayed the careful calculation with which she monitored the household. After breakfast, Poirot gathered the family in the drawing-room. "Miss Amos," he began, his voice calm but authoritative, "today we must exercise vigilance more than ever. The criminal has grown bolder. Red herrings, fear, and subtle manipulations have been employed, yet the threads are now converging toward a more audacious act. We must observe, with calm minds and attentive eyes, for the next move will be decisive." No sooner had he spoken than a sudden commotion erupted from the hallway. A loud crash echoed through the manor, followed by a startled cry. Poirot moved immediately, his eyes scanning the corridor as he followed the sound. There, at the entrance to the library, lay a shattered vase, its fragments strewn across the polished floor. Lady Vivienne rushed forward. "Oh! My mother's wedding vase," she exclaimed, her hands clutching her chest in horror. Edward knelt to survey the damage, while Clara stepped back, her face pale. Poirot's gaze, however, was fixed on the subtle signs around the wreckage, slight scuff marks in the dust near the baseboards, faint traces of soil on the floor, and the faint, lingering scent of almonds, now unmistakable. "Ah," Poirot murmured under his breath. "The criminal is testing, daring, and revealing more of their method." Mrs. Carrington, who had arrived moments later, spoke quietly. "Monsieur Poirot, I heard whispers just before the crash, soft, hurried voices. They came from the upper corridor, then faded abruptly. I saw no one." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "Exactly, madam. This is a controlled escalation. The criminal wishes to intimidate, to unsettle, and perhaps to provoke suspicion. Observe carefully, the vase is broken, yes, but what is broken is not of great value. The act is psychological, designed to manipulate." Edward turned to Poirot, frustration and fear evident in his expression. "So again, it's meant to frighten us? To distract from the real plan?" "Precisely, Poirot replied. "The clever mind relies on the predictable response of others. Panic, distraction, and suspicion are the instruments. Yet in panic, the mind is clouded, and the criminal believes their cleverness secure. But observation, patience, and reason shall uncover the truth." Poirot began inspecting the scene closely. The fragments of the vase were carefully scattered, as if the placement had been deliberate. Scuff marks on the floor suggested movement along a particular path, while the faint almond scent indicated the presence, or passage, of the criminal. Small scratches on the baseboards revealed contact with a narrow object, likely a walking stick or cane, subtly manipulating the environment. As Poirot reconstructed the scene mentally, he noticed further evidence of deliberate planning. The angle of the fragments, the location of footprints, and the alignment of dust on the floor suggested that the intruder had entered from the library's side entrance, moved carefully through the corridor, and exited through the hidden passage behind the portraits. This pathway allowed the intruder to remain largely unseen while orchestrating a display meant to unsettle the household. Clara, watching Poirot, spoke softly. "But if the criminal is clever enough to remain unseen, how can we ever catch them?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Ah, mademoiselle, that is the charm of detection. Even the cleverest mind leaves traces, subtle, almost imperceptible, yet revealing to those who observe with intelligence. Footsteps, scent, dust, and behavior all form a pattern. Follow the pattern, and the criminal reveals themselves." Later in the morning, Poirot requested Edward and Clara to accompany him on a careful inspection of the library and corridor. He pointed out the faint scuff marks and traces of soil, explaining how the criminal had moved with precision. Edward's frustration was evident, but he gradually began to see the logic of Poirot's observations. Clara, though anxious, followed every step, her understanding deepening as Poirot demonstrated the interplay between evidence and deduction. Meanwhile, Poirot summoned Mr. Blake for a private discussion in the study. He examined the letters from the hidden drawer once more, noting subtle nuances and the timing implied by the correspondence. Blake's nervousness increased as Poirot carefully referenced small details in his handwriting and phrasing, each observation designed to elicit a reaction. Poirot did not accuse, but his analysis was precise, revealing patterns of premeditation and subtle manipulation. By afternoon, a further incident occurred that confirmed Poirot's suspicions. A minor theft, again, of insignificant items, was reported from the servants' quarters. Yet the placement of objects, the traces in dust, and the almond scent all pointed to a deliberate pattern. The intruder was growing confident, perhaps emboldened by the household's uncertainty and fear. Poirot gathered the family once more in the drawing room. "Miss Amos," he said, "the criminal has escalated. The broken vase, the minor thefts, the subtle traces of scent, all are signals, designed to manipulate and confuse. Yet within these acts lie patterns, subtle but discernible. Observation, logic, and patience remain our most powerful instruments. The criminal may be clever, but no one can escape the eye of careful scrutiny." Lady Vivienne, visibly shaken, asked, "Monsieur Poirot, do you truly believe the criminal is among us?" Poirot nodded. "Oh, madam. Someone intimate with the house, familiar with routines, clever in manipulation. And today's events, the boldness of the intruder, bring us closer to revealing their identity. They have underestimated the meticulousness of observation, the power of deduction, and the inevitability of truth." That evening, as the household retired, Poirot remained in the drawing room. He reconstructed the day's events in his mind, the path of the intruder, the placement of dust and soil, the almond scent marking subtle movements, the deliberate escalation from theft to destruction. Each act was a signal, a clue, and a psychological device. "Yes," Poirot murmured, steepling his fingers, "the criminal is daring, perhaps overconfident. They believe themselves beyond suspicion, yet the little grey cells have observed, recorded, and interpreted. One more move, Miss Amos, and the net shall tighten. Hawthorn Manor holds its secret still, yet the sequence is becoming clear. Patience, observation, and reason, these shall reveal the truth." Outside, the fog thickened over the moors, and a chill wind whispered through the trees. Within Hawthorn Manor, tension and fear mingled with hope and determination. And Poirot, calm, precise, and unwavering, prepared for the final unraveling of the mystery, confident that the boldness of the criminal would ultimately lead to their own undoing. Chapter 8: The Masterful Reveal. The fog had lifted from the moors, revealing a pale, winter sun that filtered weakly through the tall windows of Hawthorn Manor. The household, weary and tense from days of fear, suspense, and uncertainty, had gathered once more in the drawing room. Today, they would finally learn the resolution of the intricate and unsettling mystery that had cast a shadow over their lives. Poirot entered the room with his usual calm elegance. His small, precise steps echoed softly across the polished floor, but there was a new energy in his demeanor, a subtle sense of anticipation, as though he had long been waiting for this precise moment. His eyes, sharp and penetrating, swept across each member of the household, Lady Vivienne seated with quiet apprehension, Edward leaning slightly forward in tense expectation, Clara with her fingers nervously intertwined, and Mr. Blake, standing near the mantelpiece, pale and composed yet betraying a faint tension in his posture. Mrs. Carrington, ever observant, remained in the background, her eyes fixed on Poirot. "Miss Amos," Poirot began, his voice calm, deliberate, and commanding attention, "the events of the past days, the theft of the amulet, the tragic death of Mistral, the fire in the greenhouse, and the subtle distractions, were not random, nor were they the result of carelessness. Each act was deliberate, premeditated, and cunningly executed by a mind most clever and confident. Yet, as we have learned, even the cleverest mind leaves traces. The little grey cells, observing carefully, noting every detail, and connecting each thread, reveal the truth." He paused, allowing his words to settle. "Let us begin with the amulet. Its disappearance was carefully timed, and the manner in which it was taken left few signs for an ordinary observer. But a careful examination, dust, fingerprints, and subtle scent, revealed the path. The hidden letters discovered in the secret drawer told us of a plan. Instructions for avoidance of suspicion, and knowledge of the household's routines. Someone intimately familiar with Hawthorn Manor's secrets orchestrated this act. Poirot moved slowly to the cabinet where the amulet had been displayed. He gestured toward the hidden panel. The panel was clever, yes, but not beyond observation. And the sequence that followed, the death of Mistral, was not mere cruelty, but a deliberate psychological signal. The cat was a warning, designed to unsettle the household and provoke distraction, allowing the criminal freedom of movement. Edward's voice broke the silence. "But who? Who could have done all this?" Poirot's gaze fixed sharply on Mr. Blake. "Ah, monsieur, the answer lies not in speculation, but in observation. Mr. Blake, you are a man of knowledge, intimate with the assets, the routines, and the vulnerabilities of this household. You observed the amulet's significance, the paths through the house, and the psychological impact of subtle acts. And yet, you believed cleverness alone would protect you from discovery." Blake's fingers trembled slightly as he adjusted his glasses. "Monsieur Poirot, you can't mean..." Poirot raised a hand gently, cutting him off. "Patience, monsieur. Observe first, then speak. The evidence is clear when examined logically. The fire in the greenhouse was deliberate, the choice of items, the careful placement of the candle, the traces of soil, and the faint almond scent all mark your method. Each act was a signal, a test, a psychological manipulation to mislead and to assert control." Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Edward's face hardened, and Lady Vivienne looked stunned. Blake's composure faltered visibly, his usual calm disrupted by the meticulous unraveling of his scheme. Poirot continued, turning to the others. "And the red herrings, Miss Amos, small thefts, misplaced letters, dust disturbances, were clever, yes, but not perfect. They drew suspicion elsewhere, as was intended. Yet, by observing movement patterns, scent traces, scuff marks, and inconsistencies in statements, one can see the true path of the criminal." He picked up a fragment of paper from the side table, one of the charred remnants from the greenhouse. "This fragment, seemingly unimportant, tells much. Notice the handwriting, the careful folding, and the intended placement. The criminal's mind is orderly, meticulous, and deliberate. Every act, even destruction, serves a psychological purpose, manipulation and concealment." Poirot then addressed Blake directly. "Monsieur, the path you took, from the library to the corridor, the hidden passage behind the portraits, and finally to the greenhouse, was calculated. The traces of almond scent, the subtle scuff marks, and the soil on the floor were all instruments in your performance. Yet, they were not invisible. The careful eye, the analytical mind, and the application of logic reveal your steps. Even confidence cannot erase truth. Blake's face paled, his hands twisting nervously. You have been following me." Poirot shook his head serenely. "Not merely following, monsieur. Observing, connecting, and understanding. Your cleverness relied on human predictability, fear, distraction, and misdirection. But the pattern, the sequence, the subtle traces, they are consistent. Observation reveals method, and method reveals mind." He turned to the assembled household, his eye sweeping over each face. "Now, let us consider motive. Monsieur Blake, you were aware of the amulet's significance. Merely as a family heirloom, but as a symbol of wealth and influence. Your actions sought not merely possession, but manipulation. Psychological pressure, fear, and subtle misdirection were your instruments. And yet, the little grey cells, ever vigilant, perceived the entirety of your design." Blake's voice was barely audible. I did it. I only wanted. I thought no one would notice." Poirot's expression softened slightly, though his eyes remained sharp. "Indeed, monsieur. Desire, impatience, and overconfidence led you to believe that subtlety alone could protect you. Yet even subtlety leaves traces, a footprint, a displaced object, a faint scent, or a momentary hesitation. Observation, logic, and attention to detail reveal the truth." He then addressed the household as a whole. "And so, Ms. Amis, the mystery is solved. The amulet was taken, Mistral was killed, the greenhouse was set alight, and minor thefts were orchestrated, all by Monsieur Blake. The red herrings were deliberate, designed to mislead. But even the cleverest plan cannot escape the eye of careful scrutiny. Each act, no matter how subtle, leaves a mark. And each mark, when observed and understood, reveals the criminal and their method." Edward let out a breath he had been holding. "So, it was him all along." Poirot nodded. "Oui, jeune homme. The mind behind these events is Monsieur Blake's. His knowledge of the household, his access to private areas, and his understanding of human psychology allowed him to orchestrate events. But in seeking to control and manipulate, he left traces, and those traces reveal all." Lady Vivienne's hands trembled as she addressed Blake. How could you do such a thing?" Blake's eyes fell. I did not mean to hurt anyone. I only wanted the amulet, the power. I thought I could control everything." Poirot spoke gently, yet firmly. "Desire, ambition, and impatience are familiar to us all. But methodical observation and reasoning shall always reveal the truth. Hawthorn Manor secrets have been unravelled, the criminal exposed, and justice, though delayed, is now certain." He turned to the household once more, a faint smile touching his lips. "Let this be a lesson, Miss Amis, even clever minds cannot outwit the truth when observed carefully. And the little grey cells, they never rest. Every detail, every subtle clue, every human reaction contributes to revelation. The amulet shall be recovered, the house restored, and the lessons of observation and reasoning remembered." As Poirot concluded, a sense of calm returned to Hawthorn Manor. The tension, fear, and uncertainty that had clouded the household lifted, replaced by relief and the quiet satisfaction of truth revealed. Even Blake, resigned to his fate, seemed to recognize the inevitability of his exposure and the brilliance of the detective who had unraveled his carefully plotted scheme. Outside, the winter sun shone more brightly, reflecting off the frost on the moorland and casting gentle light through the manor windows. Inside, peace returned slowly, restored by the precision, insight, and unwavering brilliance of Hercule Poirot. And in that calm, methodical order, the household understood fully that while cleverness may manipulate, subtlety may deceive, and fear may mislead, truth, observed with care and reasoned with intelligence, would always prevail.